Welcome to the show that puts you in the center of all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. We have some exciting news. The show is going on the road again. We've been to D.C. live, Lansing live, and soon another spot. We'll have more to say about that in just a bit. But as we always say, the news comes first, and there is so much to cover tonight, as is usually the case with the Trump administration. Tonight, NPR fighting back against the Trump administration as it tries to cut funding to the network. The argument they're making, plus our own Charlie Langton with his analysis on the case. You heard us right. Charlie is in Studio C tonight. And Democrats taking a page out of President Trump's playbook as they try to rebuild before 2028. You'll remember he went on a podcast a lot last year, the president did, to appeal to younger voters. It worked. Democrats, well, it didn't work for them, and it didn't work out for them in the long run. Now they're taking notes and sitting in on podcasts. We'll talk about the podcast primaries with Democrat Ebony J.J. Curry and Republican Perry Johnson. But we begin tonight with more new guidance for the COVID-19 vaccine. Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. said the CDC will not recommend the shot for healthy kids and pregnant women. That announcement was made in a video posted on X. No one from the CDC was actually in it, and the CDC referred questions about the move to Kennedy and the Department of Health and Human Services. The previous guidance was yearly boosters for all Americans 6 months and older. It comes a week after the FDA announced routine approvals will be limited to seniors and younger people with underlying health conditions. But now there's questions about if the shot will be available for young, healthy Americans, and if so, whether it'll be covered by insurance. Take a listen.
Fortunately, when CDC says we don't recommend it, then sometimes insurance doesn't cover it. So I want it available, but I don't want it pushed. Those mandates had a huge backlash that hurt public confidence in public health.
A CDC advisor panel should meet in June to make recommendations for the fall shots, as the advisory panel usually does. One of the options, suggesting shots for high-risk groups, but giving lower-risk people the choice to get one. Turning to the budget battle, where President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill works its way through the Senate. They hope to get it done by July 4th, but the margins are tighter than they were in the House, and at least one Republican has come out against it. We know where Democrats stand, specifically with cuts to Medicaid on the table. But there's a divide in the Democratic Party, some saying they support it even if they aren't happy. Others say, no way.
I think we have enough to stop the process until the president gets serious about spending reduction and reducing the deficit. You don't defeat the deep state by funding it.
I think the cuts currently in the bill are wimpy and anemic, but I still would support the bill, even with wimpy and anemic cuts, if they weren't going to explode the debt.
Republicans have a 53-45 majority with 2 independents. It's not clear how a retooled Senate bill would sit with House Republicans. Of course, we'll be on this every single night. Turning now to 2 battles involving the Trump administration playing out in court. National Public Radio and Harvard University both suing over some of the administration's moves. Now, you'll remember Harvard already sued over the administration's calls for leadership changes, as well as cutting off international student enrollment. A judge blocked that second move, at least for now. Well, the Trump administration made another move today, asking federal agencies to cancel contracts with Harvard worth roughly $100 million. A letter from the General Services Administration told agencies to review contracts and find other arrangements. The Trump administration has already canceled more than $2.6 billion in federal grants for the Ivy League school. And NPR sued today, along with 3 of its local stations, over an executive order that essentially cut funding to the network. They claim it violates their free speech rights and relies on authority the president doesn't have. Trump told the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and federal agencies to stop both direct and indirect funding to NPR and PBS. He and his supporters claim their news reporting has a liberal bias. I asked you on social media how important NPR is to you with that lawsuit in the works. Here's what some of you told me. Patty says with over 1,000 public radio stations providing them with news, cultural programming, and other content to those who are underprivileged or those who live in rural communities who really depend on it. Not everyone can get streaming or satellite service. Jennifer says NPR is public radio with excellent programs. The Moth National Storytelling Program is one example. More people should try listening to true stories of real human experiences. Kara, between radio, TV, and podcasts, the U.S. has an overabundance of widely accessible outlets for news and entertainment. There's no longer a need for taxpayers to subsidize public TV and NPR. And finally, Chris says cut off all taxpayer subsidies. People who want to support them can start donating more during their telethons. Let supporters put their money where their mouths are. You know, these are just the latest fights involving this administration to end up in the courtroom. And you know, when there's a legal question, who are you going to call? Fox 2 anchor and attorney Charlie Langton. You wish you had the Ghostbusters music right now. In Studio C to break down both of these stories. So good to see you, Charlie. It's been a minute since I've seen you.
Yeah,
see you running around the halls of Fox 2. We talk more on television doing the live shots now, but I love having you on the Pulse because this stuff is sometimes hard for people to understand because with this administration, it is so polarizing. The Democrats say, see what they're doing, and then the Republicans are like, wait a minute, this is within his jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Cutting funding to NPR, what do you make of it legally?
Well, I think this is a battle of this is an idealistic battle for sure. But let's take a look at both of the NPR and actually the Harvard thing. They're very similar arguments. One is a First Amendment violation, and the other one is the extent to which the president can use his executive order, which we've talked about on the Pulse before. But let's go back to the First Amendment. First Amendment, what is the protected speech here? Does anyone have a right to use the television? Should the government, should Congress fund Fox 2 News? Should they pay your salary because you have some public television or whatever? I'm not so sure the First Amendment, and even Harvard, First Amendment, they can't go out and do free speech. They can't teach whatever they want. I think this First Amendment, I'm not crazy for it. I just don't think it's going to fly. However, the second argument is the extent of the president's authority to cut funding. Very problematic. Why would the president have anything to do with funding for NPR? That's been in existence for a long time. Congress made NPR. They created this vehicle. And if Congress wants to fund them or not, it should be up to Congress. Now, maybe there's a discussion in Congress about funding a public radio. One of your viewers said maybe taxpayers shouldn't fund it. That's an argument for Congress. But for the president to take an executive order after Congress appropriates the money, I have a problem with that.
But if they start arguing this case and it becomes something very serious here, and the president says, I don't like the liberal bias that I'm hearing on NPR or on PBS or whatever it is that he's accusing, that argument, that can't hold up in court. Or does that even matter? Is that arbitrary?
I think it's arbitrary. I think you're right. I think it's arbitrary. Yeah, of course he doesn't like NPR. He doesn't like NPR called Trump a racist. Well, I wouldn't like him either. I wouldn't want to fund him. But that's a bad argument, though. That's playing politics. That's playing, I don't like you. You got to get a legal reason for defunding them. And I think the president is saying, I think though the argument though is it's a First Amendment right guarantee by NPR and Harvard to say we need money, and I'm not sure I buy that either.
I find this fascinating because President Trump, who usually is the first to punch back at journalists, is saying that the exact model that NPR follows to receive funding from the federal government is corrosive. And it really strikes against the independence of journalism. Is that an argument that could be held up?
Here's the deal. You're a smart guy. Let's assume you are, I don't know how old you are, but let's assume you're a senior in high school. You got great grades. You could get into Harvard and Yale and Michigan State even. You're that smart. Let's say now that Harvard is getting all this negative press. The president of the United States calling Harvard bad, 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 bad. Whether he's right or wrong, would you think twice about going to Harvard? It's called a chilling effect. And I think that's what the president is trying to do here. Forget the law, because they'll settle this. They'll resolve this. But there's a chilling effect now. Would I want to go to Harvard and risk maybe funding? Would I want to develop and donate to NPR? Because I don't know if they're going to be around. It's the chilling effect, and Trump's very good at that.
Well, and that's been such a term that people have used so much in the last few months, especially in the second administration, because we've seen it with immigration. We've seen it with this. Like, how many people are coming through the border, even legally at this point? They're like, do I want to go? Am I afraid? There's a lot of questions. 36% of the funding they get right now is from corporate sponsorships, NPR. So Trump would then argue, hey, why don't we just increase that? If people love your product so much, get people on board to fund it.
That's the argument. That's the argument.
President Reagan, back in the 1980s, actually ended up shrinking public broadcasting funds. When he did it, we didn't have this kind of an outcry. President Reagan also talked about getting rid of the Department of Education. Is it true in your mind, just from a political calculus point of view, that when Trump does any of this stuff, even when it's been done before by Reagan, it falls differently, it hits differently?
Yeah, because Trump is more polarizing, for sure. And Trump likes the give and take.
Right.
You've interviewed him a number of times.
Sure.
He likes that give and take. He likes that argument.
The
he likes the chess playing, the move here. What does it mean to the move? Look at the tariffs. You can do a whole show on the tariff issue. He throws the tariffs out. Then he backs off about them. But he's accomplishing his purpose in a little way. It's not stupid. He knows what he's doing. But on these issues, I think there's a real issue about funding public radio and even higher education. Harvard's got billions of dollars in their endowment. Should they use that? Again, I think we're going to get this, but it should not come from the president.
What happens to the Harvard case, do you think, with the president as they go head-to-head?
I don't know that the president can cut funding to higher education. I think a judge is going to rule that way, and I think this executive order is going beyond what an executive order should do.
So there's two different pots of money for any university. You got private funding and you have federal funding. Even if it's under the jurisdiction of federal funding, you don't believe that necessarily the president has the power or the privilege to be able to do that.
So if Congress wants to study something, if Congress wants to, they'll hire Harvard to do it. They'll pay Harvard. But here's this chilling effect. If I'm in Congress, I don't know if I want Harvard to do it because we don't like Harvard. I don't want to get on the president's bad side. I'll give it to Michigan State, for example. And that's what's going to happen. Who wins in this one?
And
Trump wins.
Right now they're talking about how to get this money that was going to be funneled over to Harvard to other places. Exactly the conversation you're talking about. Charlie Langton, our legal analyst here at Fox 2. It's a gift to have you here. We love having you on. Come back again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Charlie. Up next, Democrats taking a page out of President Trump's playbook, trying to reach young voters and voters who just don't watch everyday TV news. The podcast primaries next with Ebony J.J. Curry and Perry Johnson. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. With us now to talk about everything from the budget bill to the podcast primaries. It's an interesting one. Senior reporter with the Michigan Chronicle, Ebony J.J. Curry, and former Republican candidate for governor and president, Perry Johnson, someone who's a friend of President Trump's and someone who spends a lot of time with him as well in the last few years. And we really thank both of you for joining us here on The Pulse. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's talk about. Let's get right into it. This podcast, this is how it all went down, whether you like it or not. Kamala Harris's camp was offered the same thing as President Trump. Come on Joe Rogan's show, hang out. And my understanding is that folks at the Harris campaign essentially said, she can't make it to you, but if you can come over here and we can shorten the time, we'll do it. And they said, no, thank you. Trump, on the other hand, showed up, spent the time, did that podcast, and then did like a bunch of other ones. Ebony, is that a lesson learned for Democrats to get on these podcasts and be accessible to everyday people?
I think it's very important, and I believe Trump does a really good job at this when it comes to media presence and all assets with social media, not just local media or national news outlets. I think it's imperative to also get on the bandwagon of podcasts. I mean, although it is hyper-specific audience-based, I think it's very imperative and very important to be able to put yourself in front of all media opportunities.
Your friend President Trump actually said something along the lines of, Barron walked up to me one day and said, hey, you should need to get on some of these podcasts. And I said, who are these guys? And he just said, you got to listen. And boom, the campaign reached out. Perry, people are saying that made a huge difference because the conversations you have on podcasts are different than Meet the Press. Is that true?
Not only that, you get to really feel the personality. You get to see what the person is all about. It's extemporaneous. It's something off the cuff. You get to feel the emotion. And let's face it, Trump loved that.
Well, do you believe if given an equal shot, and I don't want to re-adjudicate the election, but just quickly, just for giggles, for kicks, just tell me, do you think if VP Harris got the same opportunity as President Donald Trump to be on all those podcasts, that we'd see a different version of Kamala Harris? Ebony?
I wouldn't say a different version. However, I would say you will have a more in-depth understanding because, as Johnson just mentioned, these podcasts allow personality to come out more. And as I mentioned, I think it's a pro and a con to the podcast. As I said, it's hyper specific audience base. So the pro is you're able to reach all different audiences if you like. The con, however, is the fact that you see who they're trying to reach, if that makes sense.
Which demo?
And as far as Trump, he's very sensationalized. So everyone loves the extraness, about Trump. He brings the provocative energy, and I think that's really where he succeeded.
Perry, right now, I can tell you that Gavin Newsom has his own podcast in Kentucky. Andy Beshear has his. Governor Whitmer was on one, and Pete Buttigieg was on Andy Schultz's Flagrant podcast, and that's a very popular one, but it's more right. And they teased him about his sexuality. They teased him about it, and he joked about it. Do you think this will now give an upper hand to Democrats like Governor Whitmer, who may have her eyes on a bigger prize, and others out there?
Well, there is no doubt that media sells. Exposure sells. Look at the Kardashians.
Right.
My goodness, everywhere you turned. And you ask, what did they ever do? What they did was make themselves known. You make yourself known, you give yourself an opportunity. If you're not known, that opportunity is lost.
Let's talk about this really important budget bill that right now the Senate now has its hands on. Ebony J.J. Curry, the talk that we're hearing a lot from the left is about whether or not Medicaid cuts can actually happen here and how many people would be hurt. When you watch this, and even as a journalist yourself, what part of this story do you think is 100% true, and what part of it do you think is being sensationalized?
The truth is, obviously, there may be some Medicaid cuts happening. I think the part that's not being televised or told enough is who is going to be affected by the bottom line. At the end of the day, underserved communities are going to be most affected. When it comes to Mitchell Johnson, who's on dialysis, or Miss Jones, who has to go and get her insulin, or someone who looks for prenatal care or postpartum care, who counts on Medicaid to be able to get those services, they're the ones who are going to be impacted.
But do you believe, because the things that they're cutting right now, they're saying the $700 million worth of cuts will be coming through requiring certain work parameters, right? So 80 hours a month of community service, school, or work. Do you think that that's an unreasonable ask, or do you think that there's simply some people will fall through the cracks? And how do you think that'll happen?
I think some will fall through those cracks. For instance, if you think about the guy who's on dialysis, he can't get up to really do the community service. Are you going to have like different tweaks to that? How can he do the community service without being as physical as he would?
Perry, are you concerned about how some people may fall through the cracks of these work requirements?
Actually, I think everybody has to recognize that there is a major problem we have throughout the entire country, and that is that the government's spending too much money, and everybody knows medical costs are stratospherically high. They're killing us. What we have to do, though, is recognize that we have become an amazing, amazing country. And the one reason that we have moved so far and we're the dynamic, real economy of the world is that the people work. They're incentivized to work. We incentivize people to go to school to better themselves. We incentivize people to say, okay, I know if I want to get ahead, I have to work. And that theme is what has made America what it is now.
Do you worry, though, that there are people out there who were able to work, perhaps when they first applied for Medicaid, are now unable to work, and now are sitting, for instance, like that person on dialysis, who may now not have a choice but to lose Medicaid? Do you think that that's possible?
Actually, I think that's very unlikely. What I do think is going to happen is that people that are unable to work, legitimately unable to work, will still get the same coverage. What is not going to happen, though, is to have a situation where we allow people to get all this coverage that's better than you get, better than Charlie gets, and they don't work at all.
What about cutting SNAP benefits? Is that something that you think is a little premature?
For me, again, if someone is unable, clearly, I think if they're doing, it in a responsible way, obviously they're on SNAP benefits for a reason. Unfortunately, they just cannot afford groceries today, specifically with inflation going on.
Sure.
I hear eggs are $10 now,
Well, we're going to sit here and we're going to continue to discuss this. This isn't going anywhere. They hope to have it passed by July 4th, and that's something that we'll be watching carefully. Perry Johnson, Ebony J.J. Curry, good to see you both. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. A lot more to come after the break, including a preview of one of the biggest political events in Michigan every year. And yes, we're heading to Mackinac. The Pulse is. We'll tell you more about that next. Stay with us. It is people, power, and politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This is The Pulse. You saw it. It's a busy day in politics, and you know what? There's even more to talk about. Let's run through some of the other big stories tonight. The Supreme Court shoots down an appeal from a group of Apaches fighting a massive copper mining project in Arizona on federal land they hold sacred. The justices left lower court decisions in place, transferring the land to the mining company. Justice Neil Gorsuch, who was appointed by President Trump during his first term, wrote a dissent, calling it a mistake to not take up the appeal. The Apache group vowed to never stop fighting. Well, staying at the nation's highest court, where the Trump administration has asked justices to halt an order allowing migrants to challenge their deportations to South Sudan. That appeal comes hours after a judge suggested the Trump administration is manufacturing chaos. That judge ruled the administration violated an order to give migrants a chance to challenge their deportations. The group was flown out of the U.S. just hours after getting notice, leaving them no chance to contact lawyers. Government lawyers argue the judge stalled its efforts to deport migrants who can't be returned to their countries. And we're turning now to the race for Senate, because a third of it is up for re-election in next year's midterm. Take a look at this. 20 Republicans, 13 Democrats. One of those Democrat seats is right here in Michigan. And we've told you, Senator Gary Peters isn't seeking a new term, so Michigan will elect a new senator next year. And now we know Alabama will as well. Current Senator Tommy Tuberville is running for governor in that state instead. The state's current governor, Kay Ivey, can't run because of term limits. Tuberville is a household name in that state after he served as Auburn head football coach from 1999 to 2008. And yes, that photo is his actual Senate headshot. And some of the biggest names in politics are in one of Michigan's most iconic spots this week. We're talking about Mackinac Island. The Mackinac Policy Conference is happening this week. One of the hot topics will be Governor Whitmer's plan to bring new jobs to Michigan by giving companies incentives. But some conservatives have found an unusual ally, progressive Democrats. The governor argues if Michigan doesn't offer these incentives, other states will poach those jobs. But former State House Speaker says there are better ways to get jobs here. Take a listen.
Those southern states, they've got things like no income tax. They've got things like right to work. They've got a much better unemployment system, workers' comp system, legal structure. There are a lot of underlying bases, things that we can do, like cutting red tape. Incentives, if they happen, they're the last thing, not the first thing.
Well, it's a lot to play out, and stay tuned as it does. And before we go, we're taking the show all about people, power, and politics on the road and across the straits tomorrow and Thursday. I'm actually moderating a forum at the Mackinac Policy Conference, which will include another familiar face, battleground host S.E. Cupp. Remember her from the election? I'll be interviewing some of the biggest newsmakers on both sides of the political aisle, from the speaker to the governor. We'll preview the conference from the island tomorrow and watch for our special edition of The Pulse on Thursday from Mackinac Island. We'll see you then. That is The Pulse for tonight. Remember, you can email us your political questions or a fact check you want to see. ThePulse@fox.com is the email, or just scan the QR code on your screen. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was good to be with you.